I'm a woman with chronic schizophrenia. I spent hundreds and hundreds of days in psychiatric hospitals. I might have ended up living my life out in a back ward of a psychiatric hospital, but that hasn't been how things turned out. In fact, I've managed to stay free of psych hospitals for 30 years, perhaps my proudest accomplishment. That doesn't mean I've been free of all psychiatric struggle. As a young woman, I was in psychiatric hospitals for 3 lengthy periods on the East Coast. My doctors gave me a diagnosis of chronic schizophrenia, and my prognosis was said to be, quote, very poor and, quote, grave. In other words, I was expected to be unable to live independently, let alone to work. That hasn't turned out to be my life. Instead, I'm a chaired professor of law at the USC Gould School of Law, with a beloved husband, Will Vinay, and many close friends. I'd like to share with you how that happened and describe my experience of being psychotic. I qualify that by saying my experience, because everybody becomes psychotic in his or her own way. So for me, my psychosis is like a waking nightmare with all the bizarre images, impossible things happening, and the utter terror. But unlike with a nightmare where you can open your eyes and make it all stop, you can't make a psychotic episode stop by opening your eyes. So my own schizophrenia involves delusions, sometimes bizarre, like I've killed hundreds of thousands of people with my thoughts, or a nuclear explosion is about to go off in my brain. I've had occasional visual hallucinations, though not since the mid-90s when I started on the atypical antipsychotics, and I've had disorganized and confused speech. I've been spared the malignant negative symptoms of schizophrenia, except the first 2 years of my illness when I was unable to work and unable to make friends. I think my therapy interrupted those malignant negative symptoms. Several years ago, I decided to write down my experiences and my personal journey in the book, The Center Cannot Hold, My Journey Through Madness, and I want to share some of my story with you today to convey the inside view. So to give a flavor of my psychosis, the following episode occurred in November 1982 during the 7th week of my first semester at the Yale Law School, quoting from my book. My 2 classmates, Rebel and Val, and I were meeting in the library to work on our law memo assignment together, but we didn't get far before I started talking in ways that made no sense. Memos are visitations, I informed them. They make certain points. The point is on your head. Pat used to say that. Have you ever killed anyone? Rebel and Val looked at me like they or I had been splashed in the face with cold water. What are you talking about, Elyn? Oh, the usual, you know, who's what, what's who. Let's climb out of the library window onto the roof of the law school. It's safe. Rebel and Val followed and asked what had gotten into me. This is the real me, I announced, waving my arms above my head. And then, late on a Friday night, on the roof of the Yale Law School library, I began to sing, and not quietly either. Come to the Florida sunshine bush. Do you want to dance? Are you on drugs, one asked. Are you high? High? Me? No way, no drugs. Come to the Florida sunshine bush, where they make lemons, where there are demons. You're frightening me, one of them said, and then Rebel and Val headed back inside to the library. I shrugged and followed them. Back inside, I asked my classmates, are you having the same experiences as I am of words jumping around the pages? I think someone's infiltrated my copies of the cases. We've got a case to joint. I don't believe in joints, but they do hold your body together. So an example of loose associations. Eventually, I made my way back to my dorm room. And once there, I couldn't settle down. My head was too full of noise, too full of oranges and law memos I could not write, and mass murders I knew I would be responsible for. Sitting on my bed, I rocked back and forth, moaning in fear and isolation. Ending the passage. This episode led to my first psychiatric hospitalization in America. I had had a couple in England prior to that, continuing with my writings. The next morning, I went to my professor's office to ask for an extension on the memo assignment, and I began gibbering unintelligibly as I had the night before. He eventually brought me to the ER. Someone I'll just call the doctor and his whole team of goons swooped down, grabbed me, lifted me out of my chair, and slammed me down in a nearby bed with such force that I saw stars. Then they bound both my legs and arms to the metal bed with thick leather straps. A sound came out of my mouth that I'd never heard before. Half groan, half scream, barely human, and pure terror. Then the sound came again, forced from somewhere deep inside my belly and scraping my throat raw, ending the passage. This incident resulted in my involuntary hospitalization. I was said to be not only dangerous to myself and others, but also gravely disabled. And the reason they wrote that I was gravely disabled was I couldn't do my Yale Law School homework, which made me wonder about much of the rest of New Haven and their civil committability. During the next year, I would spend 5 months in psychiatric hospitals. At times, I spent up to 20 hours in restraints, hands tied, hands and feet tied down, hands and feet tied down with a net tied tightly across my chest. I never struck anyone, I never harmed anyone, I never made any direct threats to anyone. In addition to long-term restraints, I was forcibly medicated at times and I had very little privacy. For example, I was watched often when I went to the bathroom and took a shower, and I was not allowed to talk to anybody, including my parents, outside the presence of staff. The British hospital could be guilty perhaps of benign neglect, or at least a hands-off approach, and I find that much preferable to the over-interventionist approach of the American hospitals. As I've come to say, I'm very pro-psychiatry, but very anti-force. I don't think force is effective as a treatment, and I think using force is a terrible thing to do to another human being with a terrible illness. Eventually, I came to Southern California to teach on the law faculty at the University of Southern California Gould School of Law. For years, I had resisted medication, making many, many efforts to get off of it. I firmly believe that if I could do with medication, I could prove once and for all that I really wasn't mentally ill, that it was all a big mistake. My motto was the less medicine, the less effective. My analyst was saying that I should just get on the medication full time and get on with my life. I said I wanted to try one last time to give it the best try I could to get off the medication, and if it didn't work, I would stay on it, quoting from the book. I started the reduction of my meds, and within a short time I began to feel its effects. After returning from a trip to Oxford, I walked into my analyst, Kaplan's office. I headed straight for the corner, crouched down on the floor, and began to shake. All around me were evil beings poised with daggers. They'd slice me up in thin slices or make me swallow hot coals. Kaplan would later describe me as, quote, writhing in agony. Even in this state, what he accurately described as, quote, acutely and floridly psychotic, I refuse to take more meds. The mission is not yet complete. Immediately after the appointment with Kaplan, I went to see Dr. Martyr, a schizophrenia expert who was following me for tardive dyskinesia. He was under the impression that I had a mild illness, and I didn't disabuse him of that. Once in his office, I sat on his couch, folded over, and began muttering. Head explosions and people trying to kill. Is it okay if I totally trash your office? You need to leave if you think you're going to do that, said Martyr. Okay, small, fire on ice, tell them not to kill me, tell them not to kill me, what have I done wrong, all the explosions, hundreds and thousands of thoughts, interdiction. Elyn, do you feel you're dangerous to other people or yourself, he asked. I think you need to be in the hospital, and I could get you into UCLA right now, and the whole thing could be very discreet. Ha ha ha. You're offering to put me in the hospital? Hospitals are bad, they're mad, they're sad. One must stay away. I'm God, or I used to be. Actually, at that point in the manuscript, my husband, where I said I'm God or I used to be, wrote, did you quit or were you fired? I give life and I take it away. Forgive me for I know not what I do. Ending the passage. Eventually, I broke down in front of friends and acceded to everybody's demands that I take more medication. I could no longer deny the truth and I could not change it. The wall that kept me, Elyn, Professor Saks, separate from that insane woman who had been hospitalized years before, lay smashed and in ruins. Everything about this illness says I shouldn't be here, but I am, and I am, I think, for 3 reasons. First, I've had excellent treatment. Intensive psychoanalytic psychotherapy 4 to 5 days a week for decades and continuing. I know the theory, analysis is supposed to end, but I'm going to be a lifer. Also, this has been combined with excellent psychopharmacology once I accepted the need for medication. Second, I have many family members and close friends, and these people give my life a richness and a depth, and they're also another set of eyes to help me negotiate symptoms. Third, USC Law School is an enormously supportive place which has not only accommodated my needs but embraced them. At the same time, the law school is very intellectually stimulating. Occupying my mind with complex problems has been one of my most potent and reliable defenses against my mental illness. As I've come to say, my mind is both my worst enemy and my best friend. What those of us who suffer with mental illness want is what everyone wants. In the words of Sigmund Freud, to love and to work. Thank you. I am a woman with chronic schizophrenia.
So this is Dr. Elyn Saks. Elyn, welcome.
Thank you.
Elyn, we have known each other for 15 plus years.
That's right.
And it's remarkable. You started this video tape by saying that I'm a woman with schizophrenia. But you are also somebody different. You are also a distinguished professor of law and psychiatry. You are a MacArthur Foundation Fellow, and you got the Genius Grant from the MacArthur Foundation that led to creation of the Saks Institute for Mental Health, Law, Policy and Ethics. You have been to Oxford, before that Vanderbilt, and subsequently you graduated from Yale Law School. You now have a PhD in psychoanalytic science from the New Center on Psychoanalysis. You have published 5 books and 42 articles.
Wow. I didn't know I did all that.
It's really remarkable. I mean, there are 2 different Elyn Saks. One is a person with schizophrenia, and one is this highly distinguished thinker, philosopher, law professor, ethicist. How do you reconcile these 2 images?
Actually, my first analyst in LA used to say there were 3 me's, not suggesting that they were personalities, but just aspects of myself that were in conflict. There was Professor Saks, there was the lady of the charts, in other words, the person with the thick hospital record, and there was Elyn. And Dr. Kaplan thought that Elyn was the most neglected of the 3, and that I spent a lot of my energy trying to prove that there was no lady of the charts. It was all a big mistake. Eventually, through psychotherapeutic work, coming to terms with the, quote, narcissistic injury of having a mental illness and accepting it more, it paradoxically came to define me less. It became sort of accident rather than essence. So today, Elyn and Professor Saks are at the forefront, and the lady of the charts is a trailing third, and I'm very pleased about that. Thank you. I want to say one other thing about the MacArthur Award. So my school was very generous. They put on a reception for me, and they gave me a T-shirt, and it had a picture of Einstein and a picture of me, and it said, "Only one of us is a certified genius." To which I responded, "I've been certified many times in the past, but never quite in that way."
So in your daily life, do you think about having schizophrenia, or do you think about your other academic roles?
You know, for the most part, I think about my academic roles and my life with my husband and with my friends. The mental illness is there. It's always kind of lurking in the background, threatening to come back or threatening to give me symptoms. But for the most part, it doesn't occupy a lot of my mental time anymore. I mean, that's changed. For a long time, it was just totally preoccupying.
You not only have schizophrenia, you also have breast cancer.
I also have thyroid cancer and a second breast cancer, so I don't have very good health luck. And a subarachnoid hemorrhage.
It's really remarkable. Some people think about schizophrenia, it's almost like cancer of the mind. And then you have breast cancer. I mean, how do you separate out one is a physical disease and one is mental illness?
It's sort of interesting. A cancer diagnosis is a huge blow, and obviously cancer can be very life-threatening. Is my mic going off? No, it's still okay. And it's very threatening and very scary. At the same time, if you have a good prognosis, after the treatment ends, you don't think much about it, or at least I don't think much about it until I get a cough, because every cough is lung cancer when you've had cancer. But for the most part, it's not part of me and it doesn't define me. And the mental illness seems more of a global characteristic. I mean, we like to say, I am not mentally ill, I have a mental illness, like we don't say I am not cancered, I have cancer, but a lot of us still feel some kind of internal stigma. So that's a difference. And the other difference is people, I think less of people with mental illness than they do of people with cancer. There's more stigma. I saw a slogan once, imagine being blamed for having cancer, because people with mental illness sometimes are blamed for their illness. And sometimes when I give a talk about stigma, I recount the story that when I became physically ill, my closest friend flew in from Boston to be with me, Steve. And he looked past our embrace and commented on the many beautiful bouquets of flowers I'd received. At which point I had the thought, when you go to a hospital for a physical illness, people send flowers. When you go for mental illness, they don't. Sort of interesting, I made that speech, it was either in San Francisco or in Oregon, and the local NAMI or MHA group, I forget which, took it on themselves to send postcards and letters to everybody who ends up in a psych hospital. I thought that was really great. I felt terrific about that.
You read the book Beautiful Mind and you saw the movie Beautiful Mind. As you all know, that's the story of John Nash, the Nobel laureate, who also suffered from schizophrenia. And John Nash actually was a keynote speaker at the APA a few years ago.
Oh, was it? I missed that.
It's a beautiful movie. Although they have taken some liberty with truth, as Hollywood usually does. When you saw the movie, did you see yourself in John Nash?
You know, it's kind of interesting because I sort of didn't. He had more paranoid delusions. I had some paranoid delusions that beings in the sky were doing things to my mind, but I had a lot of disorganized psychotic symptoms as well, which he seemed not to. I thought the movie did a great job of bringing the viewer into the delusional world of Nash. You thought what he was doing was real, and then you find out, as he found out, that it wasn't real. Also, I think psychosocially, I think he may have been more annoying or full of himself than I hope I am. And he, I hope, I don't really know. And he made his discoveries before he became ill, and I had the great luck and good fortune to be able to work even after I became ill. But obviously, a Nobel laureate with schizophrenia, what could be better, you know?
And we first met each other almost 15 years ago. At that time, at UCSD, we were doing some research on decision-making capacity and how to improve it. And I got a call from somebody at NIH, and he said that, have you talked with Elyn Saks? She's really one of the experts and not too far from you. And so that's the time I called you, and then you came, and we began collaborative work, and we have published several papers together. And you developed a scale called Scale for Appreciation as a part of the decision-making capacity. It was about 4 or 5 years later that one day you came and told me that you were going to announce that you had schizophrenia. And
what was your reaction? I'm asking you questions now.
It's interesting, actually, when you told me that you had schizophrenia, the first reaction was of great admiration. That here was somebody who was so talented, so gifted, and she could come out and say that I have schizophrenia. That is just remarkable. I mean, it was taking a lot of risk. And actually, when we talked about that later, I understand you were concerned. You thought that I might actually stop collaborating with you.
I did, yeah.
Which, of course, would not have happened. But I always admire the decision to come out and talk to the public about that, including your students, your colleagues. How did you decide to do that?
You know, I thought about doing it for a long time, many, many years, and I don't remember the moment at which I said, yes, I'm going to do this. But I decided to do it. I got a lot of advice not to do it. One of my friends who's a geriatric psychiatrist said, do you want to become known as a schizophrenic with a job? Which of course I didn't. But then I thought I probably couldn't do anything that could potentially be more helpful to other people than telling my story. I mean, I had job security, I had tenure, I had respect, I had people in my life, and that kind of thing. So I decided to go for it. I don't know if it was brave or foolhardy, but it turned out to be a great decision. I've just gotten nothing but a lot of support and kindness and thankfulness, and it's been wonderful, actually, in that way.
Did you ever regret the decision?
You know, the only bad thing about it, and I say this tongue-in-cheek, is I get so many emails that I can hardly stay caught up. But for the most part, it's been all good. It's just been lovely. I mean, being in the public light is sort of a mixed thing. On the one hand, it's kind of neat for someone to tap you on the shoulder, you know, at a restaurant and say, "Are you Elyn Saks?" And I actually had a funny occasion. There was a page interview at the LA Times with Pat Morrison and a picture of me. And that day I rode down in the elevator in my condo building and a man said to me, there was an article about a woman today in the paper and the picture looked exactly like you. So there's also some, feeling of being, under a microscope a little bit. And I have to admit that there's some internal stigma. Do I really want to be known as someone with schizophrenia? And there's a kind of story around that. Glenn Close, whose sister and nephew suffer from mental illness, started an organization called Bring Change to Mind, and she asked me to be on her board, and I her. She gave me a T-shirt which said schizophrenia on it, and my first thought was, well, I don't wear T-shirts to work during the week, but I do on weekends. And then I thought, but do I really want to wear a T-shirt that identifies me as having schizophrenia? And then I thought, with the cancer, people wear armbands and ribbons and shirts, and they do it with solidarity and pride and no shame. And that's the way it should be with schizophrenia, but we're not there yet.
This is really remarkable to come out and talk about schizophrenia. I think what happens is, in public mind, schizophrenia shows up in the media only when there is some violent act. And so there is this association of schizophrenia or other serious mental illness with violence, because that's the human face that they see.
I didn't get that last part.
The human face that people put on schizophrenia is that kind, although it is so rare. Most people with schizophrenia or other mental illnesses don't commit crimes. They are more likely to be victims of the crime rather than perpetrators. But the problem is that the type of face, and that's why what you have done and what John Nash did and what some of the other people with schizophrenia have done is really remarkable for helping reduce the stigma against schizophrenia.
Yeah, I hope so. Glenn Close's organization sponsors research or uses research on stigma, and I think what they find is the public coming to see mental health disorders as brain disorders doesn't reduce it much, but people coming forward and putting a human face does. When you're working with someone in the next office and they have schizophrenia, but they're just like you at work, they have the same trials and tribulations and gratifications and so on, that changes people's minds more than scientific advances, I think.
But this must have been a change in your lifestyle in a major way, because once you wrote this book, this is the book, The Center Cannot Hold,
That's what
My
it looks
Journey
like.
Through Madness. It's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
This is incredibly well written, and this has been on the bestseller list of a number of magazines and newspapers. And since then, you were interviewed on several talk shows, and how did you handle this celebrity that came with publication of a book like this?
It's a work in progress. It's sort of, hard to believe, really. I never expected I would get this kind of response, and it feels nice. It also feels like somewhat of a responsibility. I can't tell you the number of emails I get from people saying, please help me. My loved one won't take medicine, won't go to therapy. What can I do? And I try my best, I tell them about NAMI, and I tell them about certain books that have been helpful to me, but there's not much one can do, and that's makes you feel helpless and so on. And I do my best. But it has sort of changed my life a little bit because I'm known by some people, kind of thing.
So you talked about the medications that you take, and so what's your opinion about the medications?
As I said in the little video clip, I really resisted being on medication for a long time. My theory was the less medicine, the less effective. The way I could prove that I really wasn't mentally ill was by getting off the medication. So I would try time and time again. But eventually my analyst put his foot down and said, you really got to get on with your life. Stop trying. So I tried one more time, being the stubborn person I am, and it didn't work. And I got on the medication, and it just made my life much better. It just, really improved the quality of my life. I sort of had a fantasy that everybody had the same feelings, thoughts, and fears as I did when I wasn't on medication. And then I got a med that cleared my mind, and I'm like, maybe that wasn't the way everybody thinks and everybody acts. And And I used to say I didn't want to use a crutch, again, going back to that narcissistic injury point. Now I say, if my foot were broken, of course I'd use a crutch. Well, my neurotransmitters were broken. Don't they deserve as gentle and kind of treatment as a broken foot would? So I'm completely reconciled to being on medication now, and it's made my life much better. That said, I think there are lots of interesting philosophical and theoretical issues around what is mental illness versus just difference, and certain people may choose to believe mental illness is a lifestyle choice, and if that works for them, great. I take the view that it's a medical illness and that I need therapy and medication because pragmatically that view works for me. It makes my life better.
You also have undergone psychoanalysis, and of course now you have PhD in psychoanalysis.
I do, yeah.
Do you think psychoanalysis helps people with schizophrenia?
You know, I think it doesn't help most people with schizophrenia, but I think it helps some people with schizophrenia. For me, it was an equal partner with the medication to my doing well. People often contrast supportive psychotherapy with psychoanalytic psychotherapy, but my analyst used to say that for those for whom psychoanalytic therapy works, it's the most supportive psychotherapy there is. You go 4 or 5 days a week, someone's listening, someone's caring for you, and that kind of thing. There are early studies that it was not effective, and there are certain risks. People may not develop bonds. Freud thought that. I don't really believe that. People may regress too much. And again, there were studies that it was ineffective. I would love to see a study today with skilled analysts and people on atypical antipsychotics and see whether we get a much bigger bang for the buck than we did in the past. And of course, if we do, we have to study ways to find out who it's beneficial for and who it's not. But for me, it's been a lifesaver. It's just been so important. I've tried cognitive behavioral therapy and other therapies, and nothing really worked remotely as well.
So one question. So as a certified psychoanalyst now, as somebody who has PhD,
right,
would you feel comfortable doing psychoanalysis on other people with schizophrenia?
You know, I was getting clinically trained, and when my book came out, I stopped that part of my training. I felt like, you know, you're supposed to be a blank screen, and I was like totally not a blank screen anymore. And I actually consulted Kay Jamison, the bipolar psychologist, and she said she also stopped taking new patients because most of her patients were more interested in what was in her mind than what was in their mind. So I decided not to finish my clinical training. And I have mixed feelings about that. I always have loved my job and never intended to do it more than 4 or 5 hours a week anyway, so it wasn't a huge loss. I found doing it incredibly interesting, but very difficult. I have to give it to you guys who do therapy. It is hard work, it really is. Again, very interesting and very gratifying. So I have mixed feelings about not doing it anymore. And it may be some people with schizophrenia, if they knew about me, would be more trusting or more open or think I would understand more. But I think I made the best decision for myself to not do that as my life goes forward.
When I think about your schizophrenia, it still baffles me. Usually, in case of John Nash, you can understand he's a mathematician. And in your case, you are a law professor, you are a thinker, ethicist, a writer, speaker. The things that involve thinking, abstract thinking. And schizophrenia is thought to be a disorder of thinking, especially abstract thinking. When I was doing residency, I was taught that to diagnose schizophrenia, one thing you do is give them some abstract proverbs and see how they interpret. A person with schizophrenia would interpret them in a very concrete fashion, and that would support the diagnosis of schizophrenia. So how can somebody who has a disorder of thinking be such a great thinker?
Thank you. I don't really know what to say for that. I have been not neuropsychologically tested, and I do have some very severe deficits in memory tests and in visual spatial things. But my abstract reasoning ability, I think, is good. And I mean, I think there are two possibilities, or maybe they're both true. One is that my illness just happened to spare me that disability, that impairment. And the other is I really like working a lot. It's one of the things that gives me the most pleasure. I mean, I go into the office 7 days a week because I love writing an argument, writing a counter argument. And maybe it's just sort of exercising the muscle, keeps it a little bit fitter than if I just kind of didn't do that. So I don't really know what the answer is. I'm eternally grateful that I am able to think. But
There's also this kind of writing. I mean, you just didn't start doing that now. I mean, you had been doing it throughout this period that you have had schizophrenia,
Right.
starting going back to your Yale days.
Right.
And it's really remarkable that somebody who's supposed to have a serious thought disorder is also such an outstanding thinker. It really is a puzzle from a research perspective also, sort of trying to find out exactly what is it that makes the things work.
Right.
Obviously, you are different from most other people with schizophrenia. You're doing so well.
But I want to say, I often on the lecture circuit, people say I'm unique. You know, there aren't other people with schizophrenia like me, but I'm doing studies, one with you, one with Steve Marder at UCLA. The one at UCLA, we've recruited 20 subjects. We've got doctors, lawyers, teachers, full-time students, 20 people we recruited fairly quickly who are high-functioning, high-achieving, even in the face of schizophrenia. We are out there, the stigma is so great that people don't come forward. I totally understand that. But I don't think I'm unique. I think there are other people like me. And I actually asked Steve Marder, what percentage of us do you think fall in this category? And his answer was, I'm not sure, Elyn, but the real question is how many more could be if we gave appropriate treatment?
There's no question about that. Some people would say, though, you have been fortunate in some ways.
I've been what?
You have been fortunate in having the resources you have had. Of course, the most important resource is your intellectual resource as well as your resilience and so on, but also other resources, financially getting the best possible care that you could. You have been at great universities where you really could get the type of care that you needed. That's not always true for other people.
I have to say, I'll get people in an audience saying, you know, you see a doctor 5 days a week. I can see my patient once every 3 months for 15 minutes. How on earth is that person going to do as well as you? And I say, you're absolutely right, and I feel some survivor guilt. I've been fortunate to have the resources, and I'm an example of what can be done if we invest the resources. And we just need to step up to the plate to provide people more care. There may be ways to do it more cheaply than 5-day-a-week psychotherapy. I mean, it may mean that a peer counselor meets with you for 20 minutes, 5 days a week, and that may do something really important. Now, we need to study ways to do it. But it's a tragedy that, and I consider myself incredibly fortunate to have had the resources, and it's a tragedy that our society doesn't provide that for other people.
I personally feel that the material resources you have available are really much less important than who you are in terms of your resilience, ability to rebound, ability to adapt, and your steadfast devotion to what you're doing. And
my little brother used to say when I was a teenager that I was the most stubborn person he ever met. I think it served me in some ways.
So, how do you think you can impart that to other people? I mean, how would you educate or help other people with schizophrenia to develop the traits you have that led to your success?
One of the things, the study we're doing at UCLA and USC is asking people what techniques they've developed to manage their symptoms. And we're hoping to find some commonality and be able to design an intervention that's both teachable and effective to help people who aren't doing as well to do better. And another friend had a suggestion of, I have this fantasy of starting a kind of virtual site where people with schizophrenia can go. And one of the ideas was having mentors, higher functioning people mentoring other people, or maybe we should call it peers rather than mentors. I'm not sure what the right term is. But you know, again, this is something that we need to think about and figure out how to do because it's important.
Some people think that there is a narrow line between creativity and mental illness. And sometimes people think that it is good to have a mental illness that increases your creativity. Did you ever feel like that?
Not really. I felt like my creativity was hampered when I was having symptoms, and in fact, one of the good things about working is it kept the symptoms at bay. That said, maybe one thinks a little bit outside the box sometimes because of the illness, so that's a possibility. But basically, I mean, I think there's more evidence that people with bipolar illness are creative than that people with schizophrenia are. But I understand the concept. I also think having the illness, makes me more sensitive to other people's struggles. Sort of I think that's one reason my book has resonated with people, because even if people don't have mental illness in themselves or their families, most everybody has some kind of struggle or other. And maybe it's made me more empathic. That said, if a pill would take it away instantly, I would take it in a heartbeat. So.
At this stage, I thought we would invite your husband to join us for a few minutes. So, Will. So this is Will Wines. Will, thank you for coming here.
Thank you for the invite.
Of course. I think the audience would be interested in knowing what you do. And
what I do and what I would like to do are not necessarily the same thing. I'm one of those people who has a day job and avocation that I pursue apart from that. So the day job, I typically describe myself as an information geek. I work for a law firm and I do research, find whatever information they need. The avocation, I've long been involved with art. I have a background as a furniture designer, furniture maker. I've done the graphics for Elyn's presentation, those of you that have seen it, and a wide variety of things of that nature.
I know that Elyn has written about how supportive you have been and how helpful that has been.
Elyn is very generous. It's interesting. Many people make the assumption that the support Elyn needs is centered on mental illness factors. I would disagree with that. That generally is not the case. The support Elyn needs is much more frequently centered around physical illnesses, which she's had far too many.
Yeah. I think these days my worries about my health kind of eclipse other things.
So when Elyn decided to come out and talk about her illness, I'm sure that affected your life.
Initially, I would say it did not. As the book, after the book was released and became popular and Elyn began speaking widely, it certainly affected my life in a positive way, as has my whole relationship with her. You know, my background does not include hanging out with people like Dilip and many other very significant people that I've met because of Elyn.
I have to tell two Will stories, though. Can I tell two Will stories? So I think this is in my book. I don't even really completely remember. But so Will invited me out to see the poppies after we had a lunch one day. And we walked around this beautiful poppy field in Lancaster. And I kept saying how cold I was. I was hinting that he should put his arm around me, and he never did. But at the end of the day, he kissed me a long, lingering kiss goodbye. And the thought I had, I swear to God, this is the thought that went through my mind was, this is even better than getting an article accepted. The other thing was Will had spoken lovingly about his parrot at lunch, and he brought a feather from his parrot and pasted it on my computer. And that night I asked my college friend Kenny, and I'm not sure why I asked this because I don't think it happened, I thought it happened this way, but I said, Kenny, do you think a guy who plucks a feather from his bird and pastes it on his computer likes you? And Kenny said, I don't know, Elyn, but one thing for sure, he likes you better than he likes his bird. Which at that moment wasn't true. He definitely liked his bird better. He was shaking yes.
So, how is Elyn at home?
Verbose. I mean, it's the perfect storm of a lawyer And what do? They talk, they write, they talk some more, and add in an academic, and what do? Unless they're scientific investigators, they talk, they write, they talk even more. So you get verbosity squared.
Yeah. I would like to continue this interview for a long time, but unfortunately, I think we'll have to end it soon with the next. But I have a couple of questions before we end this interview, Elyn. One is, what do you think about psychiatry and psychiatrists?
You know, I really have to say that psychiatry is, in a way, the star of my show. I've been enormously helped by psychiatrists. As I said, I had 5 times a week psychotherapy and medication. I'm a lifer. I'm going to continue. It helped me evade my grave prognosis and lead a good and happy and fulfilling life. And I think psychiatrists help people not only saves their lives, but helps them reclaim a really good and happy and productive life. So again, I'm incredibly grateful for what you all do. And on behalf of my fellow patients, thank you very much. Thank you.
And lastly, I hope this happens, but I've heard some rumors to that effect. Will Hollywood be making a movie on Elyn Saks?
You know, there's a movie option has been taken out, and there's an actress and a writer attached, but I'm not really allowed to say who that is right now. I will say that we're going to call the movie A More Beautiful Mind. No, that's just a joke. So I hope there's a movie. I hope you'll come. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Philip. You're
And
a great colleague and a great...
let us give a big hand to somebody who has helped the field of psychiatry enormously. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.